All right, heartbeats, heartbeats. Welcome, welcome. I am so glad to see you again. Guess what? I have another special guest. Welcome to the Heartbeat Station. Tune in and turn up. This is where we talk to holistic practitioners in many, many different genres. I have brother Hzal Anubewei, and he is here with us to uplift us with his spiritual writings. So maybe you'll hear one of his writings and it will definitely feed and speak to your soul. All right. So welcome, Brother Hzal. How are you?
I'm tremendous. How are you?
Absolutely excellent. Thank you for asking. So I'd really like to dig in. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and we were talking about your works. And I know that you've been a writer since 1970, author, poet, playwright. I mean, what is it that you don't do in the writing field? I'm also going to introduce you to my granddaughter because she's a writer too.
Okay.
So tell
Sounds
me a
great.
little bit, how did you start in writing?
All right.
What was the catalyst or what inspired you?
So uh, basically, this started in 1968, and I was at a transition in terms of living. I had just turned 21, um, and was looking for something different because I really hadn't been doing anything in terms of progressing. And 21 in 1968 would be old in terms of doing something because of the way that the world was. People
Yeah.
got married at 16, 17. I didn't get married until I was 23. I was like an old man. But there was a guy that I met, his name was Norman Jordan, actually two, but Norman Jordan specifically, who was a tremendous poet. Now, the thing that's so amazing, at least from my standpoint, I had never heard a Black person read poetry
Mhm.
ever. I mean, I had read County Cullen and some other writers when I was in high school, but I had never seen anybody Black reading poetry.
Mhm.
And so that was from the standpoint of something that was unusual from that particular time was like mind blowing. This was also during the period of time when the so-called, I won't say so-called, but there was a lot of revolutionary activity.
Activism. Yep.
And so I got involved with Norman and some other people that completely changed my whole life.
Mhm.
Prior to that time, basically, without getting into a whole lot of detail, I was primarily in the street. And so if you know what that means and understanding where I came from, the environment I came from, which was transitional, I needed to make a change.
Yeah.
Absolutely necessary for my survival. So Norman is a person who should have been a lot more famous than he was. But he was writing at that time, which became known as spiritual poetry or conscious poetry, which they call it, I guess, in the last 30, 40 years. He was doing this back in the 60s.
Mhm.
Not that he didn't write poetry that defined Black culture or identify with Black culture, but Norman's thrust, his ideas were much more spiritual.
Mhm.
And thank goodness for me that I met him because it enhanced my understanding of not religion. And I'm not knocking religion for those who want to trip, but I'm not knocking religion. It's just that religion is a step.
Mhm.
It's not the it's not the end all. And
Yes.
there are other doors, other avenues that you can explore, which are more profound because they basically accosted what we call so-called religion and turn it into something that it was never meant to be. It was
Yeah.
always meant to be something much more spiritual.
Mhm.
And so that started my awakening. And for the next 2 years, I actually lived in a commune. There were only two communes in the United States at that time.
Mhm.
Moved in Philadelphia, and then the organization that I belong to in Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I'm from.
Mhm.
Ours was called the Community, and we actually lived in a commune in the inner city. I mean, deep in the inner city.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
We all lived in one house. There were like about, I think, 15, 20 people. And I'm talking about families. There were two families. We had 4 men on the 3rd floor, and there were 3 or 4 females that also lived there. We lived in common. During this period of time, I didn't really work because I belonged to this group, and so we took care of one another. This period of time allowed me to really investigate and look into spirituality. Mm-hmm. And so I began a deep study. I mean, really deep, plus diet. So I learned about why you shouldn't eat meat. Not that you just don't eat meat, but we're not physically designed to eat meat. Our teeth are not designed to eat meat.
Absolutely.
But grinder.
Yeah.
Like cows. And then the other thing that somebody pointed out to me is all the meat that we eat, none of the animals that we eat meat.
Eat meat. Exactly.
So, which kind of caused my mind to begin to think about, so they're telling us to drink meat, drink milk and all this other kind of stuff. And they're also telling you about protein. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, how can an animal eat grass and have hooves? Their hooves are harder than my bones. They're bigger than me. They have bigger bones. So I'm like, okay, so then that tells me there's something that goes on when you take food in that operates inside the body.
Yes.
That turns whatever you're eating and turns it into, from a chemical process, turns it into something the body needs.
Yes.
So this whole thing with the spiritual awakening and spiritual studies, and visions and all this kind of stuff has a lot more to do with research and study, and it gives you actually a deeper understanding of religious texts.
Yes.
Because, which is another issue, but I don't want to get too far afield, but there's nothing really wrong with the religious texts. It's how they're manipulated and used to control people.
Yeah, and a lot of it is personifications, metaphysical, and when you understand the spiritual realm, you're able to interpret it so that it resonates with you, and you get to understand or overstand or understand a deeper level on the better way of living, so that you can be healthier, love even deeper and unconditionally, and live a life of quality. So yeah.
So the other thing, so part of our thing with the community, we did a lot of meditating. We met with, I've studied Hinduism, Buddhism, Sufism, Christianity, studied some Eastern religions, specifically Paramahansa Yoganandaji, who was a so-called Indian mystic. Just studied a lot. Taught myself astrology, studied astronomy, so I could calculate. And I had to study astronomy because in order to become really proficient in astrology, I had to learn how to calculate the motion of planets, and I couldn't do that without studying astronomy. And that led into another whole thing, because I didn't know how much I liked science. I always liked it.
Yeah.
But because of the way it was taught in school, I didn't really pursue it.
Right.
But this taught me something completely different. So, and then the whole thing, and then the relationship between astrology and the Bible, and all that business. The Israelites,
and numerology. I'm assuming some numerology along with that.
Of course, you had to. Well, because what happens is that once you get on the spiritual path, which is another amazing thing, is you're a seed, and you're a seed planted in yourself. And as time goes by, those things the knowledge or wisdom, or whatever you want to call it, plants a seed in you. Well, that seed grows. It has branches. It begins to manifest.
That's right.
And those manifestations become a part of you. So like we used to fast. And I know the first time we fasted, I fasted for like 24 hours, almost killed me, because I was used to eating a lot every day. And I think the second or third time I fast, I got to 3 days. And then I had to take like a month off because it exhausted me.
Yeah.
But my diet, which had switched from a meat eating diet, and I was on a raw foods diet,
Mhm.
I did that for like 5 years. I only weighed like 140 pounds.
Mm.
But I discovered um, what it means to have willpower. I understood what it meant to be internally strong, and I also understood what it means to be clean, to be physically clean. And
That's
because of my habits, I only needed to sleep 4 or 5 hours a day,
right.
which was good because I was reading on the average of 10 books a week. Within 2 years, I know I consumed over 2,000 books when I purchased over 500. I was reading all kind of stuff, reading the history of Josephus,
Mhm.
um, who was one of the authors of the so-called history of the Israelites.
Mhm.
And again, that gets into another whole story because the more you're introduced into the quote unquote consciousness, the more you research, the more you study, the more you get into history. And when you get into history, then you begin to find out who you really are
That's
as
right.
a person, as a people.
Yeah,
Discovering that black people did not originally come from Africa in the first place, the ones who were here. That a lot of us were already here in America,
hmm,
which gets
absolutely.
into another history
Yeah.
and how everything was not truthfully told, how the the with the how can I say this? The regal society of Europe was actually black and
Hmm.
was not European, and that what they learned from us.
Yeah.
That we were on the island of Ireland, and that it was actually black people there. That
Yeah.
all of the gods originally came from black people, and how old civilizations really are, because the information they give us, and I've codified it into what I call the House of Limits. The House of Limits basically based on, I'm not going to blame the European, but based on what we call history, so-called his story, only goes back a few thousand years, including the biblical history, and how everybody's attached to that, which is maybe 4,200 BC, when we already know that that can't be true.
Right.
The earth is about 4 billion years old.
Yeah.
And there's just certain things that make sense, that why would God wait, which they say that creation is about 14 billion years old. So
Yeah.
why would God wait 13,998,000,000 years to produce man on earth, or even 6 million years?
Yeah.
Why would God wait 13 billion years if it was a billion years ago that man appeared on this planet? Why would he wait 13 billion years?
Yeah.
You live in a creation that doesn't have an ending, but they keep trying to put an ending. The
They
the
not even an
idea that
ending that, but they keep on putting a beginning. And then why would we assume that we are the only beings in the vast galaxy? You
but
know, with many,
there's a
many different inhabitable planets, I imagine, but they're in different dimensions and different beings. So I think it's real
exactly.
selfish or ignorant to think that we are the only ones.
Actually, it's even more than that, because there's an axiom in the Bible that there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
And so if there's nothing new under the sun, and the sun is a star, and there are countless stars.
That's right.
The thing with man, which is really ridiculous, and like you say, arrogant, we're not unique. We're not unique in creation. We're not unique. And I've come to the conclusion based on the visions that I've had, which is another conversation. And if we have time, I'll go into that. But I'll say it this way. We as humans did not originate on this planet. That humans, quote unquote humans, came from someplace else millions of years ago.
Mhm.
And that we've gone through different stages of development. And you know that's true because so-called apes and monkeys and all these other things, they live in what you call, from a spiritual standpoint, what's called the animal world. And so their animism, or their animalistic intelligence, has a barrier.
Yeah.
They can only be so intelligent. They cannot become human, and humans were never apes or monkeys or anything else like that. Now,
Mhm.
that's not to say that there were people or beings that came here that did not manipulate certain maybe species
Mhm.
without tapping into too much of I don't want to get into the racial thing,
Yeah.
but when you talk about people, there are people who were not here uh, 50, 60, 100,000 years ago, that certain people were not even recognized as human. That the first so-called bipedal human was actually in Africa, in the Congo, in that area.
Mhm.
So, and for those who may say, well, what does it have to do with spirituality? Well, there's what's called root races. And the root race, the original root race was the black race, and then the brown, and then so forth. But each root race, from a spiritual standpoint, when you start talking about the chakras are electrical currents, which reach their summit in the pituitary gland, or was known as the crown chakra.
Mm-hmm.
And from that chakra, all of the energy that flows into the body comes into the crown chakra,
Mm-hmm.
and then down to the pineal gland, and then down.
Right.
So when you awaken it in the East, you see all these dragons, and people completely misunderstood the idea of dragons. Mm-hmm. Dragons was the awakening of the spiritual energy, which starts in the gonads, and then it comes up. So there's two canals inside of the spine that's called the Ida and the Pingala. And when you cross the quote unquote so-called Red Sea, which is referred to in the Bible as Moses, who's not a real person, but a state of, what's two things. One is the state of being, and the other side is it represents energy.
Energy.
And so when you have Moses along with all the people, and all these people that are referred to as cattle and all these other stuff, those are concepts that from a spiritual standpoint represents consciousness. And it's the herding or the gathering up all the consciousness to go across the water, which means to go into the so-called promised land, where the promised land actually is the consciousness or the subconsciousness. And so what you're trying to do is to awaken it. Mm-hmm. And if you notice in the Bible, anytime that there's some kind of a major transition, it happens around water.
Water. Yeah, because it also is an electrical current. It also has the flow. It also is connected metaphysically to our emotions and our ego. And to be able to move through that into the higher lands, then or the higher consciousness. I get it. I get it. So Heartbeats, you are getting a lesson in spirituality. And so holistic practitioners come in many different what would I say? Many different, I don't want to say the word forms, in many different practices, for lack of a better term. I can't think of the word I want to say. But this brother here is a spiritual, holistic practitioner. Notice that he talks about eating the right foods, fasting, and not only eating the right foods, but also thinking. Reawakening our subconscious, getting into who we are in our inner selves. And what I like to say is getting into the heart.
Yep.
And understanding the heart of the matter. And remember, the heart it's a physical organ. It's the energy center. It is an electrical center. It is a muscle. It holds memories. If our physical heart stops beating, then we stop breathing, and then we become a whole different being. Yeah. People was going to say you become dead. No, you become a whole different being. And so I'm loving this. I'm hoping you loving this. And I'm going to ask the brother to continue our lesson in a spiritualness.
Speaking of the heart, so now we go to a square because the heart has 4 chambers.
That's right.
And it has 4 chambers because things that are foundational are built into the number 4. It's a 3 and a 1. So it's a triangle plus 1.
Yep.
So you have father, mother, son. And then you have 1, which is the next generation. We refer to as ancestors. So there's a whole lot that we can get into with that. Let me
So we got to have a part 2, Heartbeats.
Yeah, we probably would need one. Let me do this though. So this is the book. This is Seso the Prophet.
Yes.
This book started in 1976. Let me back up. Let me say this. I had 5 teachers when I was in the community.
Yes.
And within about 6 months, I began to have visions and insights into it. I did not know who I was. Okay. We know that based on specific laws of attraction, which is one of the seven basic laws, there are no accidents.
Mhm.
And so it was not accidental for me to have even met this individual, uh, Pete. And there were five poets there that read that night, but he's the one that I was the most attracted to. They were all good, but Norman had a completely, to me, he had a different things. So that experience that I had that night was a baptism. And I've been baptized twice. Most people only baptized once. I was baptized twice. And the second time I got baptized it was really amazing. But meeting Norman was a baptism. And so it sparked something in me. I did not know I could write. I was considering at one point of becoming a singer, but I was so much into the street, I couldn't get the street out the way, unfortunately. But meeting Norman allowed me to awaken.
Yeah.
It was like a key. It's like putting the key in me and then opening me up like this is where you're supposed to be, not doing this other stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
It directed your path. It was
yeah,
like you put on the light and then you saw your pathway and you was like, that feels right. And you started to
yeah,
walk in that direction.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so in 76, I started having these really I say amazing visions. And the thing that really set this off was married, not doing good, living in the projects in Cleveland, not working, wife, just things not going good. And I was thinking about reverting back to my old ways.
Mhm.
I was sitting outside, and all of a sudden, and this, even now, it still makes me tear up because it was such a powerful event. But um, everything went completely black.
Mhm.
Scared the hell out of me. I'm like, what the hell's going on? I mean, literally in the middle of the day,
Mhm.
everything went completely black. I'm sitting outside and I'm overlooking a parking lot. And a voice, no, an image went past my face. Three fingers like this, quick, real fast. Like, what the hell? And a man's voice said, Hahaya. And I stood up and I said, what the F is Hahaya? And repeated it, Hahaya. And I'm like, I said to myself, I have completely lost my mind. And then in my right ear, a woman's voice said, the cry of beauty.
Mm.
Oh man, I'm like, okay, I have lost it. I've gone crazy. And I'm like, what is her higher? And what is this cry of beauty? And then the man's voice said to me, the hand of life.
Mm.
I'm like, oh God. I turned around and everything came back. I turned around. I don't know, I can't remember if I ran in the house, but it's like I was trying to get away.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I got in the house and I went to my typewriter and started typing. And for the next 2 hours, I typed.
Oh, so you had a download. Yeah. And it's
Literally, and
funny how,
here's the
right.
here's the thing that was mind blowing. I
Uh-huh.
could physically see it. It was
Yeah.
like a scroll. It
Yeah.
like it dropped down in front of me, and I'm sitting typing,
Yeah.
looking at this thing. So I typed. I wrote the cry of beauty, the cry of the fathers, and evil the third century.
Mm.
And
So those
those
were
three
the first
things.
things that you started to write, because that was one of my questions. If you remember the first things that you started to write, it's interesting how how you got that download. I mean, I've heard other people who've gotten downloads like that, and they couldn't explain how they were writing or what they were writing. It wasn't anything preconceived, and as you said, they hadn't written anything before, but they were writing, and also. It made me think how fear can can creep in and stop. And it also reminds me of that biblical story when Peter was walking the water, and then
Yeah,
as soon as he recognized, and the fear came in.
yeah. He got
So yeah,
underwater.
so it's a good teaching lesson about fear. It also tells us, our talks about our human beliefs and limitations that we have. And that's when we get to rise above that fear is when we are fully immersed in that spiritual level.
Oh yeah. And I've done a lot of writing before I did that. I wrote plays, like I wrote a play, I dreamed it, and I got up the next day and I wrote it. I mean, most of the stuff that I write, probably 80% of it, it just comes to me. And again, like I say, what the thing that was so amazing is that I had no idea. I knew I could sing because my family sings, but writing was not something that I had any awareness of. I did not know I could write. And even when I first started writing, Norman noticed right off. He said, "Oh, you got a little talent." Now I don't know if that's because I used to read even before I joined the community. I was always a reader. On the street, they called me the professor because I carried a briefcase and always had one or two books in it,
Oh, so
plus
that
other
was even
items.
showing you right then that that was part of your destiny. How long did you stay in the community?
That existed 2 years, from 1968 until 1970.
All right.
Well,
So,
end of 69. Yeah.
all right. Can you share with us something from one of your writings?
Oh, can I share?
Just an excerpt. I see how thick those books are.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to read. This is called The Old West. The Old West was always the New West. Across the Atlantic West, occupied lands occupied. Whoever lived there were not people. Send in a new population, separate and unequal, built railroads, built cars and trucks, built cities of blight and factories with machines that never grew weary, polluted the water and the air, began expeditions to land on Mars, a new world to tame, lessons already learned before. Most dazzling of all, it still called itself the Old West. The Old West, a created story of his story, made something only a liar could believe, something original that did not exist before. The land roamed for 1,000 miles, sacred land to walk upon, as long as the people had breath. You could walk upon the land for 1,000 miles, not the Old West.
Interesting. The Old West and the New West.
Yeah, the Old West was always the New West. In other words, the people who came here came to a place that was old. It was to them, it was the New West, but then they flipped it to make it seem as what it was the Old West, which is one of the tactics of those who want to talk about their story or his story, because they put themselves in places that they never were. You know, they want to flip Egypt and turn it into a part of the Middle East when it's a part of Abu Khan.
Thank you for
They
that.
want to deny a history of people like myself, like yourself, as if we didn't have any history at all when we are the ones who actually invented all of this stuff. They want to deny us the history of mathematics. We had to, what does they call that? Forgot the name of that bone, but the bone, they found this thing, I think it was in the Congo, which is about 4,000 years old or something like that. They have the Rhine mathematics, the manuscript that they know is well over 2,000 years old. But we had algebra and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
invented pi, 3.14. I mean, there's
Yeah,
so much stuff. Medicine.
yeah, absolutely. And civilizations upon civilizations above and below Earth level. So, tell us, I like the fact that you talked about you came from the streets and made this transition. And I'm sure there's a lot of young brothers, in particular, I'm speaking in reference to the young brothers who have this in them. They have this knowing. I'm not sure how to bring it out without making themselves, having their friends tease them and not letting their streets take over them.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember I wrote a poem years ago called "The Street Snatched My Sons." And so, how
Right.
to get the streets to regurgitate Give us back our
Well,
children.
you know what? The thing here, one of the things is that there's this. I don't even know how to explain this, but there's like this so-called fear, I guess would be the best way to put it, of people not wanting to communicate with brothers on the block. Okay, because either they're intimidated by the brother on the block, or they don't think the brother on the block is going to understand when some of the most brilliant people I ever met in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and the guys that I really, really respected and spent time with, and we would have conversations. If people knew we would talk about these things, they would be amazed.
Yeah.
A lot of the brothers in the street, and this is why Elijah Muhammad, while there were so many Muslims
Mm-hmm.
that came out of the joint
Mm-hmm.
and joined the Nation of Islam, because those brothers could see it wasn't that they didn't want to participate in things in quote unquote society.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that society didn't want them to participate because of their quote unquote aggressiveness. Mm-hmm. Okay. Notwithstanding that, for a brother to exist in this system, in this dichotomy, where they want to give you this dual mind of being a citizen of a system that decries your existence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then they want you to be this other person that accepts the nonsense of the system.
Yeah.
And don't say anything.
Yeah.
That dualism in terms of manhood can't exist.
Yeah.
So you either have to accept the nonsense and go along with it, or you have to make a decision that you're not going to participate with that nonsense, which could put you, depending on what's going on with your life in terms of what you're doing, mm-hmm. where you may be at odds not only with the system but with your own people. Because you're trying to survive.
And even as your immediate family.
Yeah. As an adult male, you are required to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. And within the context of the streets, it's like by any means necessary. Mm-hmm. Except it's flipped, because it's not spiritual. So the idea is, so how do we get the brothers in the street to become a part of the effort to save us? That's right. And to work with us. But you can't do it if you're not talking to them. So, and you have to get past their intimidation, because a lot of the so-called intimidation is not really intimidation. It's misunderstanding. Yeah. I talk to brothers on the street now.
Yeah, and fear of the unknown, and fear that has been programmed into our mind, and the beliefs that, don't talk to them. We've been programmed, we've been bamboozled to think that they're not there that they will not support us if we just approach them, and that we all have these hard times, and these are the ways that they survive.
Yeah, so, you'd be surprised what they know.
Yeah, so
they know a lot.
Mothers, you bringing up the young men, what would you suggest?
Well, number one, and that's. So as a community, and you really hate to use the terminology fractured, but our system, our culture is fractured. Okay. And to try to mentor, you have to get past the idea that the woman is being forced to raise a man. And you're seeing changes now where you're seeing more brothers stepping up and dealing with their children, which is a great thing, because that's extremely important, because you need the masculine principle in a child's life. A woman cannot produce that masculine principle.
Mhm.
That's not she's not equipped to do that. Just like a man can't be a man cannot be a woman.
Right.
Not intrinsically, not within, not wholly within themselves. That's just not, it just cannot be done because you were not designed from a design standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from a mental standpoint, from a physical standpoint, a material standpoint. You're not physically, consciously designed to be something that is opposite to your sex.
Yeah.
You can pretend, but you can't be that.
I get it.
Yeah.
And
So we have to basically work on new rules. One of those things is the process, as happened with the Nation of Islam, is this process of making men. How do you make men? And that can only be done with discipline because boys, unlike girls, require more discipline because in order for a quote unquote man to be a so-called leader, he has to go through fire.
Mhm.
He has to be tested.
Mhm.
Just like the woman has to be tested in terms of her womanhood.
Yeah.
And we have slowly but surely moved away from that in this society, which is try to devour or to eliminate the so-called sexes
Yeah.
and to create this other hybrid being. Okay. But an awakening into a more spiritual consciousness would help to, I'm not going to say eliminate, but would help to motivate people, especially young people who are under attack in terms of their sexuality, but would help them to see a different type of an image so that a boy growing up would understand where he needs to go in terms of maturing as a male, and the same thing with a female
So
in
one of the
terms of their spiritual growth.
Yeah. So, Brother Hzal, one of the things that I've done, one of my daughters is a single mother with a 16-year-old, and
Okay.
so suggested putting him in the rites of passage. And so
Okay.
rites of passage is, all boys and some brothers that are taking them through this manhood journey and and
Good.
and making them uh, be able to recite their ancestors' names and making sure that they talk to their elders and making sure that they are learning some of the using the tools and learning some of the things that men traditionally use. Also
Mhm.
having them recite some African proverbs and incorporating that into their lifestyle and having these brothers giving them leadership capabilities, recognizing their gifts, and here it is a good camaraderie because now they know that if one mess up, we all mess up, and they're learning some proverbs that help them to critically think. And so when I ask my grandson, okay, what did you learn today? The things that he can reveal, like a proverb, and I ask him, what does that proverb mean to you? And how would you apply it into your life today? And it's so refreshing just to hear him being able to express that because of course when we first said you're going to go into a rites of passage, like, oh no, what's that? No, no, no. But we knew that it was important for him to understand his history, but also be able to be with like-minded, to be able to understand his history and to be able to represent it. Because I've always taught my children that you're not only representing yourself, your parents, your family, but your race and your community at large. And so wherever you go, remember that you carry all of us with you. And so now as a grandchild, it really makes me feel good to see that he's now, oh, that's why you do that. Oh, that's why you do that. And also being able to have deeper conversations with us without the resistance. So I would suggest to our viewers that having the young man and the young, because my girls went through their rites of passage too. And
Right.
and this granddaughter, I have one that's going through it now. She's 14. I had another granddaughter who went through it when she was 16, and it made all the difference in the world to her. She said it was the
That's
best thing that
that's
ever
something
happened
that's
to her.
needed.
Yeah, I think
There
that
was
it's
no
needed. And it's something that's not new. This is something that generations of us on the continent of Africa have always done.
yeah.
Is something that even the uh, the uh, the Hasidic Jewish community went through, with their
Mhm.
children, that where they got that from, right? And so
Of course, yeah.
it makes a
Yeah.
big difference in one's life when you really start to create that better relationship with yourself. And those are some of the things in my practice, what I work on. You have issues with your family, you have issues with your intimate loved one. Let's talk about the relationship that you have with yourself first. And so when you
Exactly.
recognize your values and you self-respect, you respect yourself, and you understand that this body is also a holy temple, then you can say, okay, I'm ready to have an intimate relationship, and being able to nurture meaningful conversations and meaningful relationships. So yeah, I agree. So that's my little tidbit for you, heartbeats. When particularly your mothers where the streets have snatched your child and you don't know what to do, it's important that we have a circle of support. This is how we grow. This is how we learn, by having this. And you hear that from Brother Hzal. How did he get where he was? He had a community. He had a circle of support, and he resonated with someone that could uplift him. That was a mentor. A mentor is just not somebody there that you follow what they do, but they exemplify and they're willing to teach you, and you are able to learn just from that experience. So I just think it's a wonderful story. As we get ready to wrap up, Brother Hzal, do you have another little short thing that you can share with us?
Um, yeah, this is yeah. I mean,
And I always ask my guests as we leave these three questions: what do we do for our physical heart? What do we do for our emotional heart? And what do we do to grow our spiritual heart? So keeping that in mind. All right. So
this is called the poet. If it were just a simple story, I would have told you so. It is a more involved idea. You don't know how I want to be the poet. Not the truck driver, not the politician, not the sky or the stars, not the guarantee. I want to be the poet. I will reveal the poetry of life. It has gone out of this world. I will create an endless well of images to drown the world in joy and make tears a separate thing. I would bid each voice to sing. I am the poet and must be the other things as well. But when it comes the dying time, by what name will the people know me if not the poet?
I love it. I love it. And I am suspecting that the poet is more than just what we know as the word poet.
Oh,
It
yes.
has many, many dimensions to it. Thank you so much for sharing. So tell us, what do you do to keep your physical heart fit and ready, pumping?
Um, I try as much as possible. Uh, First of all, is to share what I've learned. That's to me, that's very important. It's unfortunate that what I got within the community and then all the people that I met within the first, I'd say first year, 6 months to a year, because of the writers that I was around. I met Hakamada Booty, Wendell Brooks, um, Carolyn Rogers, Nikki Giovanni, uh, just a host of writers. Very, 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 very fortunate. And it didn't cost a dime.
Look at that.
What happened, unfortunately, is that the writers of my generation moved on to another level. Most of them became professors in college and so forth, which removed them from the street. So in order now for a person who's like somebody out on the street who wants to write or thinking about writing, in order for them to participate in a writing program, they either have to go to a library or some other place. And there's not a lot of writers around who are actually helping people. 7 years ago, I started a program in a community center. It's called Sunrise Writers. And also I did it at some libraries. I didn't charge anything. And my sessions, there were 8-week sessions. And at the end of the sessions, we actually published a book. So I taught them how you actually put a book together. How do you do that? Show them about the copyright laws. What's copyrighted, what's not copyrighted. How do you do that? We also, once the program was over, we invited in their family and their friends to a reading. So I also taught them how to read poetry, because every poem has a voice. One of the things that got lost in the 70s and the 80s with the demise of a lot of the poets is the individuality or the different ways of reading poetry. And so when I hear a lot of poets reading now, what I hear is and they're all basically reading out of this quote unquote concept of what they call poetry, when not realizing that the poem itself, like music, it has a voice. It has an individual voice, and it's not to be pentameter. It should not all sound the same. Every poem should have its own nuance, its own rhythm.
Yeah, that's the word I was going to use.
There's a poem that I read for about 4 years, and when I finally read it the right way, the people in the audience actually got it. Not that they didn't get it before, but when I actually read it the way it was supposed to be read, the response from the audience was like, wow. Yeah. It was a definite difference.
So it's the voice and the intention and the feeling behind what you're writing. So it seems to me what you do for your physical heart is remain active, keep on writing. Your emotional heart, you pour that into your writing, and then the writing also uplifts your spiritual heart. Would that be correct to say?
That's absolutely correct. And then the intention. Intention is, to me, everything.
Yeah.
My intention when I sit down to write something is to write something that's going to last. I'm not writing this frivolously.
Yeah.
I'm not writing something that you're going to read once.
Yeah.
You know, I'm writing something that hopefully, and I'm not saying to me everything that you write to me, yeah, I mean, some things, they'll get you, some things they won't, but you would hope that if you're writing 300 or 400 poems like I've written, you would hope maybe 1 or 2 of them would actually reach enough people that it would sustain itself, you know, for maybe a century or 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. But because the intention behind it is not to write junk.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to write, and I'm not trying to write something to be famous. Okay. I mean, if I wanted to do that, I could have done that when I met Owen Dotson back in 1975. And he invited me to stay in New York. He told me point blank, I can make you famous. He said, you got everything. He said, I had all the tools. He told me, I had done a reading at Howard University. This was back in, I've forgotten, back in the mid-century. But anyway, he had got a hold of one of my books and sent me a note that if I'm ever anywhere near New York to come up. And I was in D.C., so I took a train from D.C. up to New York. And we talked for a couple of days he was living on West 50, West up 7th Avenue up at West 58th Street off of 7th Avenue, staying in
Yeah.
a penthouse.
Yeah.
So I didn't know who he was, but I knew he was somebody important. And he told me that he hadn't seen writing like mine since the 40s. He
Wow.
hadn't seen anybody like that. He said he had not seen anything even close to that. A lot of people back then called me a word magician because of the way that I could put words on the page in the order and the consciousness and the spiritual side of it is what was really shocking.
So we're looking forward for you
they
to
hadn't
have
seen
another
that.
workshop, brother. You got to have another workshop. You got to come over to Atlanta. Let me get some young brothers together, and you help to feed them some of that spiritual awareness that a lot of them are so hungry for, and they don't even realize it. So thank
I
you.
don't have a problem with that.
All right. Well, we're going to let it work. We are definitely going to let it work. But we give thanks for all that you have shared to this world, to your community, and to us in particular. Thank you so much for sharing. And we
Well,
look
thank you.
forward
Thank you,
to
Shaq.
seeing
Appreciate
your
it.
works on a whole nother level. Give thanks. And for a part two.
All right,
So
whatever.
maybe I'll
Whatever.
have you come again in June when they have labeled this Father's Day. Maybe we can do something special around that time for our brothers. But give thanks and look forward to hearing. Stay in good health. Take care of your heart so your heart will take care of
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good